Okay, let's go. So tonight we're going to talk about another cluster of ideas. Okay, again, this is sort of shotgun, just go through a bunch of different ideas and what they mean. Wait till you guys get all set. Alright, you ready to start? We good? Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about another cluster of ideas. Okay, so again, shotgun approach. You might not ever meet a person who believes all of these different things that we're going to talk about. In fact, some of them are mutually kind of incompatible, although people believe incompatible things sometimes. But these are, again, just sort of grouped together loosely for the convenience of our discussion. Okay? And second reminder, okay, what's the motivation? Why are we learning about these ideas? Okay, well, for one thing, some of them are true. Okay? For another thing, some of them are false. And you might believe them, and so you might need to change. Okay? But more importantly, especially on these ones that aren't strictly having to do with Christianity, the real purpose is just that you will run into people who believe these things. Okay? And it's kind of useless and stupid to just hide your head under a rock and be like, that's a weird idea, I don't want to think about that. Okay? That's deciding not to love certain people. Right? Whereas if you really want to go out and preach the gospel to all nations, you're going to take the time and the trouble to learn about things that people believe. Because you're going to likely talk to somebody in the next 2 years, probably even, who believes at least one of these things we're going to talk about tonight. Okay, and you kind of want to at least be prepared for that and understand where they're coming. You don't have to be an expert, but have a ready working knowledge. Make sense? Okay, so the cluster that we're going to talk about tonight is ideas that are spiritual but not theistic. Okay, in the sort of spectrum of ideas, I really kind of detect that there are basically kind of three kinds of people in our society today. You have the hardcore materialists, okay, the people who are like, no spooky stuff, okay? And then you have the sort of traditional religious people, Jews, Muslims, Christians, who believe in God. And then they believe in the sort of like traditional aspects that get included in that religion. So afterlife, soul, angels, okay, your sort of standard fare. Okay? But then in the middle, you have this kind of weird, squishy group, okay, where they're not hardcore materialists, but they also don't like traditional religion. Okay? And so they like sort of spiritual things, and they like even some of the experiences that are religious experiences, and they like the feels of religious spiritual things, but they don't really want to commit to Christianity or Islam. And they don't really believe in God as a singular entity. In large part maybe because God would make them do things that they don't want to do. Okay? God is a very inconvenient being, by the way. Okay? So it's often more convenient to ignore. Okay, so first term, okay, dualism. We gotta get clear on this. Okay? Dualism is opposed to its alternative, monism. Alright? Mona, okay, meaning one, dual, meaning two. Materialism is a form of monism. Physicalism is a form of monism. Okay? Any monism is a one-thingism. Okay? Every monism is the philosophical belief that there's only one kind of substance. Okay? All that there is blank. Fill in the blank. Now there are other kinds of monisms. Okay? So for instance, idealism would be the extreme opposite of materialism. Materialism says all that there is the material, there is nothing mental or ideal. Idealism is the extreme opposite, which says there's only one kind of substance and it's mental, it's ideal, it's all in our heads. There there is no material existence. Okay. Dualism says there's two kinds of existence. There's the physical and the spiritual. Okay. Or put it somewhat differently, the physical and the mental. Okay. Contemporary analytic philosophers tend to be mind-body dualists. They believe that when it comes to human beings, the body is one aspect or one dimension of us, while the mind is another aspect or dimension of us. Our consciousness is not physical. So there's two kinds of being, two kinds of existence. Mental existence and physical existence. Or maybe sort of soulish existence and bodily existence. Or spiritual existence, physical existence. Okay? Now, if you believe that about human beings, it's easy to sort of extend that to the whole cosmos and believe that there's sort of two worlds. Okay? There's a spiritual world and a physical world. Sort of like, old overhead sheets. Maybe you guys don't use these anymore. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, you can have your black and white overhead, and then the teacher lays another overhead sheet on top of that and then draws in color on top of that. Okay, it's two sheets, they're separate, but they overlap each other. Okay, so somebody might believe even sort of in this room right here, you got the physical side of what's going on, but then also maybe you got spirits too in the room, or a spiritual dimension to what's going on. Make sense? Yeah? Okay. Side note, there are other more sophisticated, hardcore forms of dualism. So for instance, Platonism that we were talking about this morning, that's a form of dualism. Because if you have these eternal essences, those are going to be not physical realities. So if they exist, it's a different kind of existence. But that's not to say that they're like in the room here, just on like another overhead sheet. Okay, they're like not even in space or time at all. Right? And they're not somewhere else either. They're nowhere. Because they're not the kind of thing to be somewhere. Because they're non-spatial. Okay? It's a category mistake. Okay? So that counts as a kind of dualism, but it's usually not the kind of dualism that most people have in mind when they talk about dualism. And usually, to be clear, people say Platonic dualism. Okay? Now, this, I just want to be clear about the terms. Okay? This kind of dualism is not at all the same as another kind of dualism called ethical dualism. Ethical dualism is also a two-idea theory. Mind-body dualism or substance dualism has to do with substance or reality. Ethical dualism, though, has to do with good and evil. Okay? Ethical dualism is the view that good and evil are equally real. Neither one came first, neither one is superior. That good and evil are sort of just locked in an eternal conflict with one another. And there's no clear winner. Sometimes maybe one has the upper hand, sometimes the other has the upper hand. Okay? If put religiously, when the idea of ethical dualism gets into religions, you get, for example, Zoroastrianism is a ancient Persian religion that believes in two gods, a good god and an evil god. And neither one came first. Neither one created the other one. They have both just always existed, and they've always been in conflict with one another. Okay, make sense? Of course, that's not the Christian belief. Christian belief is that there's God, goodness, and there is the devil, but the devil isn't a god. The devil is something that God made. So Christians are not ethical dualists. We believe that goodness came first, and evil exists at all, completely parasitic on goodness. Okay? Every instance of evil requires goodness in order to exist in the first place, including the devil. Okay? And there is a clear victor. One of them did come, so one of them came first and one of them will be last. Okay? The goodness. Alright, make sense? You see the difference? Okay. Another idea. Pantheism. Pantheism is the view that everything is God. Pan means all, theism, God. So all Godism. Okay? Now, what does that mean? That means this marker is God. Means this orange is God. Solomon was laughing the other day when I said God is not an apple. But a pantheist believes that. Right? It's not only an apple, but every apple there is, it's God. This table is God. Those trees outside, those are God. Okay? Right now I'm touching God.
A God or?
No, God. One God. Yeah. Yeah. There's a view called animalism, of course, right? Or animism, sorry, is the view that there are animi, spirits, that inhabit things, trees, rocks, places, groves, streams. Okay? And if you sort of take animism all the way, it could be like pan-animism, the idea that all things, everything that there is, has some spirit in it. Okay? Different spirits. Okay? But that would be a different idea. Pantheism is really the idea that there's one God, but the universe is that one God. And every part of the universe is that one God, because it's a part of God. And furthermore, there is no God beyond the universe. Just like the universe, what there is, that's God. Full stop.
Yeah, so the universe is not the manifestation of God, but is in fact God.
So there are different ways of spinning this. Okay. One way of spinning it is the idea, and this you see in sort of Indian religion that then develops into Buddhism. Okay, that when we come along as human beings and we carve up reality, notice that this has to do with realism versus nominalism, that we are always engaged, we always do it wrongly. Because since it's all God underneath, okay, any carving up or separating out of like saying that that tree is different from that stone is actually a mistake. It's Maya, illusion, a dream. Okay?
Aren't those dreams also part of God?
So on that view, okay, it's rather that there are sort of two different modalities of reality. There's the illusory dream reality in which we think things are different, and we think that I am not that tree. But then there's the deeper, true reality, okay, that we arrive at in enlightenment, okay, in which we realize that all things are one, because all things are God. And that underneath, the tree is no different than the stone, and that I am no different than the tree. Okay? That I am no different than you. Right? That you and I are actually not distinct entities at all, because we're both God. Right? Does this make sense? But you don't have to spin it that way. You could spin it in a sort of Spinoza way and say, no, like, we can carve up reality and that's fine, but we're just talking about parts of God. Right? And that once we look at the whole, we realize that the whole is God. Okay? And so I am a part of God. Because I'm this sort of separated off chunk of reality. Okay? But nevertheless, I am still a fragment of God. So I am God. Right? Does this make sense?
Yeah, there's no like names for those two different types of issues.
Well, the second one is Spinozism, and the other one I was talking about is basically Buddhism. Right? Yeah, make sense? Okay, and there are other varieties. I mean, again, we're just getting kind of a working vocabulary here. Obviously, there are books that have been written on these things. You can go read them. Okay. Now, this is related to an idea, obviously by its name, panentheism. Okay. So pantheism is the idea that everything is God. Panentheism is the idea that God is in everything. Okay? That everything that there is has some sort of divine spark. Okay. Or divine juice in it. Okay? You get this idea in a sort of popular version in Star Wars, right? If the Force is sort of this kind of energy or substance, juice, okay, that pervades all things. Okay? So this table is not the Force, but it has the Force somehow kind of in it and running through it. Okay? Luke Skywalker is not the Force, but somehow he has the Force being sort of channeled through him. And because the Force is in Luke Skywalker and the Force is in the table, that's how he has somehow the ability to connect with the table without even touching it and, move the table. Okay? Because the root idea, the root philosophical idea behind that science fiction is that there's this thing, this something that's pervading all things. And I think Yoda even says something like that. It flows through all things. Okay. All you need to make that panentheism is the idea that the Force is God. Okay. Does this make sense? Also, by the way, when I'm talking about God here today, I'm really meaning the divine. Okay. We're not necessarily talking about a personal entity that has consciousness, that has a will, that created the universe. Okay? It's just the divine, whatever that turns out to be. Okay? So notice there's a huge difference in world religions between personal versus impersonal conceptions of God. Okay. Personal conceptions of God, as in Judaism, Islam, Christianity, view God as a person, that is, an entity that has a consciousness, knows things, wills things, interacts in personal ways, maybe loves, is hurt by us, maybe, okay, is rational. An impersonal conception of God, though, would be this idea of just a divine substance or a divine force or a fundamental level of reality or a principle that's the origin of all things. But not the sort of being to which you would pray, really. Not the sort of being to which you would talk and communicate. Not the kind of being that has a plan, wants certain things, okay, is conscious. It's just a force, right? It doesn't make sense for Luke Skywalker to pray to the Force. He uses the Force, but he doesn't ask the Force anything, right? He doesn't have a relationship with the Force in a personal way, right? Does it make sense? Yeah? We get? Okay. So, both of these ideas are related to a further idea, which is the idea that my true self is God. Okay. So if pantheism's correct, okay, then I, at a fundamental level, am God, right? And furthermore, if panentheism is correct, okay, even if it's false that all things are God, if it's even just true that God sort of is this current that runs through all things, I might be tempted to think that the truest aspect of my psychology, the most inner core, the holy of holies of me, so to speak, is that current running through me. Okay? So an identification between my true self and the divine. It's a very common idea in the sort of spiritual, new agey thought world. Okay? So this, if you think that includes a sort of strong ethical implication. The idea, first of all, that you need to discover your true self, which will be identical to getting to know God. Okay? So, this whole summer we've been telling you guys you need to get to know God. Okay, and what have we been telling you to do? We've been I'm telling you to go pray, go read the Bible, go meditate on Jesus, okay, love one another. Okay, if you think that your true self is God, what sorts of advice do you think I would give?
Love yourself.
Get to know yourself, reflect on yourself, meditate, sort of do an inward dive. Okay, and if you look at New Agey practices, a lot of sort of warmed over yoga practices, okay, it's all that. Okay, that's the real focus. It's sort of this introspective, get to know the real you. Okay, but why is that so important? If you really press the yoga types, okay, why is that so important that I get to know myself? The driving force behind it is really this deeper belief that, well, because in doing so you get to know the divine. That's how you get in touch with the divine. Okay, does this make sense?
Is that what did Carl Rogers say?
I don't know. I don't know enough about Carl Rogers to say. Now notice that this is not so far. See, some of you might scoff and say, oh, that's really selfish or egocentric. It's actually not so far from certain strands of Christianity. Okay, because Jesus himself said, if anybody loves me, I and my Father will come and make our home within him. Teresa of Avila taught about the interior castle. Okay, we opened, in fact, CTS with the idea that your heart is a garden where Jesus Christ can come and dwell. So, in fact, the place where you might meet with God is inside of your interior self. But notice that in Christianity, even those very sort of interiorly focused strands of Christianity, which is not by any means all of Christianity, which has to be the branch of Christianity that I favor, it still, that is the interior, the true self, is really only the place where one meets God. The true self is not God himself. You see, there's a subtle but important distinction. Okay? So I sort of go inward in order to find God in that place. That's different from saying I go inward because my innermost depth is God. Okay? Does this make sense? Yeah. Also notice that if you truly believe that your true self is God, then at the end of the day, there cannot really be any relationship of love between you and God other than the relationship of self-love, of reflexive love. In other words, this idea obliterates or runs contrary, I should say, to the idea of an ultimate I-thou encounter between the true you and the face of God. So in other words, all the things that we've been studying in the Psalms the last 2 weeks are invalidated if this is true. Make sense?
Would the kind of Disney narrative, follow your heart, you just need to follow your heart, kind of fit under this, like a popular conception of it?
Yeah, I think it's related, right? Be true to yourself, right? But of course there are different ways to spin that. Like, why should I be true to my heart? Why should I follow my dreams? One reason why you might have that Disney narrative is because you're a hardcore individualist, like John Stuart Mill. And you think that the best happiness of man happens when everybody does whatever they most truly want to do, and they don't have anybody else telling them what to do. Okay? You can go and you can read about that in Mill's on free speech. Okay? He thinks that everyone is happiest when they just do whatever they want to do, rather than sort of being constrained by anybody else. Okay. You might think, though, that you should follow your heart because your heart is God. Okay. Or, alternatively, a more positive version might be you think that you should follow your deepest heart's desires because those were given by God, or are somehow an indicator sort of stitched in there by your creator, of your creator's will. That maybe can go wrong, but as long as you sort of like cull out the selfish, sinful desires, if you really are listening carefully enough to your heart's truest desires, that might be an indication of God's call on your life. That's not so close, so wrong, right? So I think it really matters when you get down into the nitty-gritty details of like, well, why should I follow my heart, and what exactly do you that mean I should follow my most basic impulses and like just sat like if I want cookies, like I should just go eat a bunch of cookies? That's a quick recipe for becoming a heroin addict. Okay. So yeah, you got to just get really clear on what exactly the Disney movie is propounding. All right. Any other questions so far? We're good. Yeah.
So this one is definitely different than the term that viewing God view.
Yeah, right. So we believe as Christians, right, that God is inside of us, that somehow He dwells in us, that we become a temple for the Holy Spirit. But notice, what's a temple? A temple, right, is a room, and then, sort of metaphorically, the Spirit is inside of it. Okay? So, in the Christian belief, the temple, this is you, and this is God. Alright? In this belief, okay, you have sort of your body, maybe, your psychology, your mind, and then you have this innermost point, which is simultaneously the true self and at the same time God. Okay? So you're not a container for God or a space where God comes and dwells. You really are God at core. Does that make sense? Has anybody ever heard that? Yeah? And heard people teach things like that? Yeah. Yeah, it's a big idea, and I think it's getting bigger. It's getting more popular every year. Yeah. Okay. This is connected to an ancient belief called Gnosticism. Okay, this comes from the Greek word gnosis. Which means knowledge. Okay. Gnosis. Gnosis. Knowledge. Okay. Now, Gnosticism really was a very diverse group of religious communities, religious philosophies. There were actually all kinds of different Gnostic sects that believe all kinds of different things, some of them more reasonable than others. Okay, so don't let anybody tell you, like, here's what the Gnostics thought, period, end of story. Okay, you can find all kinds of different flavors and brands. Just like when people say Christians believe that, well, which Christians, when, at what part of history? Okay, it's kind of a difficult story to say exactly what Christians believe. All right, but there's the common thread that makes all of these different sects Gnostics, okay, is that they all generally believe in some kind of special gnosis that saves the individual. Okay, so salvation is through a particular piece of gnosis, a particular piece of knowledge or insight. Sometimes these pieces of knowledge were like almost trivial, like knowing the number of the seraphim or something like that. And that if you knew this secret, that like the people that inside the religion like held this secret, and the way that you like joined the religion was they would like it's 273, right? And if you like knew that fact, that was supposed to save you. Okay, but in the more sophisticated forms of Gnosticism, like in Valentinian Gnosticism, which is, I think, probably one of the more sophisticated forms, okay, it's not any one fact that could just be like whispered in a meeting, like a secret handshake, like that I like just like let you in on the secret, okay, but more this moment of enlightenment or insight into some true spiritual reality, and that anybody who has that enlightenment, they're the saved ones. They're the elect. Okay? Gonna go to heaven, have been set free from the bonds of sin and death, whatever. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. Now, also common to that is this idea that if you are somebody who possesses the secret, the piece of gnosis, that your true self is absolutely free from sin, even while your apparent self might continue to go and do things that are morally reprehensible. Okay, so the idea might be I could go and I could, commit adultery or something like that. And they would say, oh, that's my lower self that did that. But my true inner self, the one that possesses the gnosis, is completely pure and saved. Right? Have you guys ever heard any ideas similar to that? Wait, you've never heard anything like that, Catherine?
Well, not as far as I can, like...
You've never heard God hates the sin but loves the sinner?
Yeah, I heard that taught in church before.
Oh, I've heard that, for sure.
So what's the difference? Right? I mean, inherent to that idea is the idea that somehow my sin is separable from me.
Mm-hmm.
That I can alienate myself from my sin, and that it's not really me that sin. God loves me, the real me, and somehow my sin's like over here, the thing that God hates.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's very related. Okay.
So this enlightenment they would have achieved, how could they tell if you were aligned or not? Like, how would they be able to tell if you were achieved?
Well, in the cruder forms, right, it was like, did you know the club handshake? Right?
But
If I could, do the special hand symbol, then I'm in. I'm safe.
No, I'm talking about more sophisticated.
Yeah, in the more sophisticated forms, I don't know. You were supposed to have some sort of religious experience, some moment of enlightenment, going down to the altar maybe. And this was supposed to be the moment at which you got it, and the lights came on, and from there on out, you're one of the elect. Yeah. And in many of these systems, they had 3 different levels, okay? They would have the pneumatikoi. Okay, that means like spirituals. Pneuma means spirit. They have the koi. Okay, that means the psychics, the soulish. And the somatikoi, or the sarkikoi. All right, the fleshies. Okay. And this is the human being is typically divided up into 3 parts: the spirit, which is sort of your innermost, your true self; the soul, which is sort of outside of that; and the body, outside of that. Okay, and the fleshies are the people who just go around and drink and carouse and have sex and whatnot. The sukikoi, the psychics, are the people who have at least they've sort of gotten control of their soul, and they live moral lives. Okay, but the pneumatikoi are the people who have been enlightened with this special knowledge or insight into the transcendent divine realm. Right? And once you achieve that, it doesn't matter what your soul and your body do, because it's your pneuma that's truly saved. And that's the real you. And all of the purification of the flesh, not abstaining from certain foods, not having sex, practicing certain religious rituals, is just sort of like supposed to get you ready for the insights, to prepare you for that moment of insight. Once you have that moment of insight, you can get what you want.
So you're saying there's like a common Gnostic heresy in the Church?
Yes. Throughout the history of Christianity, there have always been Gnostic tendencies within Christianity. Okay, because Gnosticism came alive around the same time that Christianity started. And the 2 communities were in the same parts of the world. Often Gnostic communities splintered off of true Christian communities. And so there's always been an interplay of ideas. And it's been there since like the very earliest Christian documents that we have. So like a lot of people, for instance, think that even in like 1 John, John is already addressing Gnostic ideas and calling them out, right? Like think about how many times in 1 John, John says like, look, if you sin, you're a sinner, right? If you claim to know God, think about how often knowledge, and the word is gnosis in John, occurs. He's like, look, if you claim to know God and you keep on sinning, you're full of it. He's calling out the Gnostic tomfoolery. Make sense? Yeah. So it's been with us ever since. Yeah. Okay. Make sense? Yeah. Everybody good? We're good on Gnosticism? Okay. This is related to another strand or kind of thing in the spiritual world. Okay, people that are kind of spiritual, like spiritual things. Just esotericism or occultism in general. Eso means inner. It's the opposite of exo. Okay, so esotericism is any sort of interest or emphasis on the inner teachings of something, the hidden teachings of something. So you guys know like the Da Vinci Code or like the Illuminati, or like all these things where it's like there's some sort of like inner, like secret, hidden history, hidden truth, okay? And we want to discover this thing that's the inner teaching of the masters, okay? As opposed to their exoteric teaching, which is what they sort of reveal to the public. Okay, does that make sense? Occultism, occulto in Latin just means to hide. So occultism is anything that has an emphasis on that which is hidden. Okay, it's come to be almost synonymous with Satanism and black magic. Okay, often when people say, oh, that's an occult thing, they mean like satanic or sorcery or something like that. Okay, but literally speaking, the occult is just the hidden dimension of society, of reality. Okay, that the special people who are in the know about, i.e., the magicians or the adepts, the Satanists, the people who know the secrets of reality. Okay, they're the occultists. Okay, does this make sense? And occultism with an O doesn't have anything to do with cults. When I was a kid, I used to think it was a cult. Which doesn't make any sense. Okay, that's a totally different Latin root. Cult has to do with worship. Okay, so the cult of something is just the worship thing. All right, or it's actually the practice of worship. But, yeah. You look like you had a question.
I do. I just can't think of the name of this. It's I believe it's a type of cult organization. It's
CTS.
they're really
I'm letting you into the big secrets here, guys.
oh, man. Wizard. Nah, gosh.
Wizards.
Hogwarts?
I think I really want to emphasize.
Yeah. All that stuff that's like secret societies and all that stuff, it's kind of that fascination.
Freemasons.
Yeah, Freemasons, yeah. So one of the things I was going to mention here, down here on the next bullet point, so I'm glad you asked, is the doctrine of universal sympathy. Okay. The idea that in the spiritual realm, there are connections between all things. The sort of crude way of thinking about this is as vibrations and resonances. Okay, so one thing over here vibrates at a certain frequency, and so it has an effect on this other thing over here that's vibrating at another or at the same frequency. Okay, so choosing to do this over here might make Isaac have a bad day, because I'm doing something over here that's kind of operating at the same frequency as him, or maybe like the inverse of that frequency. Okay, sympathy means that things experience two things at the same time. And of course, we observe this in physical reality all the time, right? I mean, practically everything is a case of some kind of sympathy, right? So like the fact that that marker falls is because this marker has mass and so does the Earth. Okay, and so there's a sympathy between the two things and they have an effect on each other, even across light years. Okay, that's sympathy in the physical realm. If I walk into a room and I strike a bell and I have a bunch of tuning forks that are at the same frequency, those tuning forks will vibrate, even across the room. That's physical reality. So this idea is kind of the same thing, just in the spiritual realm.
So could you define it?
What?
Could you just define it one more time?
Yeah, it's the idea that there's a spiritual connection between all things. That occurrences in one thing will tip off occurrences in other things. Okay, a really popular version of this is astrology. Okay, the sort of simplistic way of understanding astrology is that, okay, the sun is on a big sphere around us rotating, Mars is on a big sphere around us rotating, Saturn's on another big sphere around us rotating. Those spheres are rotating at a very particular frequency. Like Mars is, or Saturn is like 29 and a half years, the sun is 1 year, the moon is like 29 days, okay? And those frequencies sort of resonate with frequencies down here. And so you can predict kind of what's going to happen to things down here because just by observing kind of like where things are in that frequency, you can kind of get a feel for what's going on down here. All right? So there's this resonance between all things. Make sense? Yeah? And I actually think that there's something to be said for this. I think it's not altogether wrong. I think you can easily get really kooky about it. Okay? But that one idea, okay, underlies a big school of thought called Hermeticism. Okay? It's called that, not because it has anything to do with hermits, but because it's based on a series of documents from maybe the 1st century BC, maybe the 1st century AD. It's a little bit hard to date them. The Hellenistic period anyway, or Middle Imperial period. They're written in Greek, and they claim to be from the god Hermes, specifically Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes. Okay, and so there's a whole school of philosophy that's founded on these documents. They're called the Hermetic corpus or the Hermetica. Okay, and those documents and the philosophy based on them has a huge impact throughout history, even though you might have never heard of them. Okay, but that philosophy is basically the foundation of Freemasonry. It's also the foundation of like the Illuminati of Bavaria. It's also the foundation of the Rosicrucians and all the other like Knights Templar, like all those sort of things. Okay, and the central, there's a lot of stuff there. You know, we could go into. It's the alchemy too, same thing. But the central idea is this doctrine of the universal sympathy of all things. Yeah, make sense? Okay, now magic. What do you get? Magic, goetia, sorcery. What that is the attempt to exploit or use that universal sympathy of all things to get what you want, or to affect a desired outcome. Okay, so if I start figuring out that, okay, if I take some rosemary and I put it in some vinegar and I stir it like this, it'll make Isaac die. Okay, that's magic, whether it works or not, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to manipulate something over here to get a desired outcome over here. And how is that supposed to work philosophically at the worldview level? It's supposed to work because there's a connection. Okay, this is straight up like in voodoo, right? if I make a little model of you, and I'm supposed to like prick the model like in the arm, and then your arm's supposed to like go limp, right? That's because I've set up a resonance, okay, a link between my little voodoo model and you, and I'm exploiting or using that link to get to assert my will. Okay. Now, a central teaching within a lot of these sorts of strands, especially in the more pagan sort of 20th century, like Wicca or Aleister Crowley's version of Satanism, or like Luciferianism, okay, is that the will of an individual, it has one of the sort of strongest vibrations there is, so to speak. And so one of the main ways that you can get things to happen anywhere in the universe is by willing it really hard, okay? And so this is, Aleister Crowley's maxim for Satanism is do what thou wilt, okay? Will it and do whatever you want, okay? And has anybody ever heard of The Secret? Yeah, you see it in like bookstores all the time. That's exactly the idea. Is that by like wanting things hard enough, you can make the universe around you come into alignment with your will, right? Because you're sort of sending out pulses, so to speak, that like make things happen. So like if I'm driving to work, this was the example I think I like opened the book at a airport. I think I just like read the first like couple pages. And one of the examples was like if you're driving to work and you like really want to get that parking space, if you're constantly thinking, I'm not going to get the parking space, I'm not going to get the parking space, I'm not going to get the parking space, then you're not going to get the parking space. Your thoughts are sending out that pattern into reality, and then the reality ends up happening. Whereas if I think to myself, I'm going to get the parking space, it's going to be awesome, then I'm going to get the parking space because my thoughts are likewise being sort of sent out into reality, and it like makes it so, right? That pattern of thought in various forms of manifestations is like freaking all over the New Age world. Okay, so yeah, just there you have it. It's out.
To an extent, is that belief like, not necessarily your will, but just, it says in the Bible, speak those things, whatever, speak those things. I can't think of it.
I don't know what that is.
Speak those things is not as though they were.
Oh, God has called those which are not as though they were. Now, in the context, those which are not are like poor people and stupid people.
God.
What? Yeah. Yeah.
It was just putting that out there.
No, God has spoken things which are not as, he has called things which are not as though they were. It's in 1 Corinthians 1.
So we don't possess that power of being that word.
We might in God. I think we do, like in Christ, he has given us authority to bind on earth things, when we bind things on earth, they're bound in heaven.
So,
I think we can effect miracles by speaking things into existence, but that's always God's ex nihilo power that we are asking him as children, as beloved children, to effect for us. It's not just us sending out our thought vibrations into the universe and like making them so. Yeah. Now, one thing though, just as like life advice, right? I think the reason a lot of these ideas kind of get perpetuated is because, yeah, like if you go into an interview and you're confident and you think that you're going to get the job and you like project like confidence and whatnot, like that raises your chances of getting the job. And if you walk into an interview like, man, I suck, like I'm a terrible person, like they're not going to hire me, nobody's going to like me, you're probably not going to get the job. If I'm in relationships and I think, man, I'm like really dumb, nobody likes me, I don't have any friends, nobody wants to be around that. So you don't have any friends, right? And if I go into relationships and I think generally like, yeah, like this is pretty great, I'm having a good time, like this is awesome, like that makes me a nice person to be around. And guess what? I end up having more friends, So like at a certain level, yeah, like our thoughts can become self-fulfilling prophecies, but not in any like spooky mystical way, just like in a purely obvious way. But of course, one or two of, like if I go and I read The Secret, the book, and I'm like, okay, think positive thoughts, it'll like make it happen. And then I go to my next interview and I like do that and it works, I'm sold, you know. We're off to the races and I now like, I'm like a total hippie. But yeah, anybody ever heard like, oh man, yeah, this place is like giving me good vibes, bad vibes. I got a bad vibe from that guy. Yeah, that lingo straight up comes from this kind of worldview stuff. All right, I'm done. Any questions about all this stuff?
Do you think that like a lot of the hardcore like materialists, naturalists, physicalists, like it's kind of like response to self-realization?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Yeah, they see this kind of stuff and they're like, I don't want anything to do with that, so they're naturalists. But then, of course, some of this is a knee-jerk response to naturalism because